Now, let's begin. The sand felt like needles against Scott Stevens' face as he pressed himself flat behind the crumbling mud wall. His earpiece crackled with static before his spotter's voice cut through. Targets moving to the west window. You got maybe 10 seconds. Scott adjusted his scope, his breathing automatic after 15 years as a SEAL. Through the crosshairs, he could see the compound 300 yards out, baked white under the Afghan sun. This wasn't supposed to be his mission. He was squad leader, not the trigger man, but they'd lost Rodriguez 2 days ago, and sometimes you did what needed doing. Copy that, he whispered. His finger rested on the trigger, but his mind was elsewhere. Back home, Max would be finishing his baseball game right about now. Scott had missed the last 4. Missed the last 4 years of games, really, if he was being honest with himself. The target appeared in the window. One shot. Clean. Professional. Package delivered, his spotter confirmed. Let's move. They were halfway back to the extraction point when Scott's satellite phone vibrated in his vest pocket. He almost ignored it. Protocol said no personal calls during active ops, but something made him check. The number was Max's cell. Stevens, he answered, already moving faster. Dad. Max's voice was tight with panic, trying to sound brave and failing. Dad, Grandpa's friends are here. 8 men. There. A crash. The sound of his son crying out. Scott's heart stopped. Max. Another voice came on, older, dripping with satisfaction. Harold Spaulding. Scott's father-in-law. Your boy's learning a lesson, tough guy. You're in Afghanistan. Nothing you can do about it. Harold, if you took my daughter from me. Filled her head with your military bullshit until she couldn't even recognize her own family. Now I'm going to teach your kid what happens when you disrespect this family. Consider it a lesson in humility. The line went dead. Scott was running before he realized he'd started. His spotter called after him, confused, but Scott didn't slow. He'd been a SEAL for 15 years. He'd survived situations that would break most men. But nothing had ever felt like the ice water currently flooding his veins. Alicia had been dead for 2 years. Pancreatic cancer, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. In those final days, she'd made him promise to protect Max from her father. He's dangerous, Scott. He's always been dangerous. He just hit it better when I was alive. Scott had thought he understood. Harold Spaulding ran a construction empire in Pittsburgh, the kind of business that attracted rough men and rougher practices. He'd never approved of Scott, never approved of Alicia marrying some grunt who'd probably die in a desert somewhere. When Alicia got sick, Harold had tried to take custody of Max, claiming Scott's deployment schedule made him an unfit father. The custody battle had been brutal. Scott won, barely, but it cost him everything he and Alicia had saved. Harold had sworn revenge. You stole my daughter from me twice, he'd said at the hearing. First when you married her, then when you buried her. The boy belongs with family. I am his family, Scott had said. Harold's smile had been cold. We'll see about that. That was 6 months ago. Scott had kept Max away from Harold, screening calls, avoiding Pittsburgh when he was stateside. He thought the old man would eventually let it go. He'd been wrong. Lieutenant Commander Jackson was in the operations tent when Scott burst in. Sir, I need emergency extraction. Family emergency. My son. Jackson held up a hand. Stevens, you know the protocol. We're in the middle of. My son is being assaulted. Right now. By multiple adult men. I need to get stateside immediately, sir. Something in Scott's voice made Jackson pause. They'd served together for 8 years. Jackson had been at Alicia's funeral. How many men? 8. Led by my father-in-law. Jesus Christ. Jackson pulled up his tablet, fingers flying. That's not a family dispute. That's felony assault. Have you contacted local police? My son is 14 years old, sir. He's alone in our house with 8 grown men who want to hurt him because his grandfather told them to. I'm not waiting for the police. Jackson met his eyes. In that moment, it wasn't officer and subordinate. It was one father understanding another. Give me 30 minutes. I'll have you on a bird to Kandahar. From there, fastest route stateside I can manage. Thank you, sir. Scott. Jackson's voice stopped him at the tent flap. Whatever you're planning to do when you get there, make sure it's worth it. Scott thought about Max's voice on the phone. Thought about Alicia's final words. Thought about Harold's satisfied tone as he'd described hurting a 14-year-old boy. It will be, he said. 90 minutes later, Scott was wheels up on a C-130, still in his combat gear, his mind racing through scenarios. He tried calling Max 17 times. No answer. Called the house phone. No answer. Even tried Harold's number, which went straight to voicemail. The flight to Kandahar took 40 minutes. The connection to Ramstein Air Base in Germany took 9 hours. The final hop to Pittsburgh International took another 7. 16 hours total. 16 hours to think, to plan, to remember. Alicia had told him stories, near the end when the morphine made her loose-lipped, about growing up in Harold's house, about the men who came and went, the deals made in the basement, the way her father could make problems disappear. She'd gotten out the moment she turned 18, put herself through nursing school, met Scott at a VA hospital where she was doing her clinicals. He's connected, Scott. Really connected. The construction business is just the front. Underneath, she trailed off, too tired to continue. Scott had pressed. Underneath, what? Loan sharking, gambling, protection rackets. He owns half the city councilman and a quarter of the police force. That's why I never went back. Why I never let him near Max when he was born. He destroys everything he touches. Now Max was in Harold's hands, and Scott was 16 hours away. He landed at Pittsburgh International at 0400 local time. No luggage, no change of clothes, just his tactical gear and his single-minded purpose. He'd made 3 calls during the flight. The first was to Sergeant Angelo Kirk, a former SEAL who'd retired to Pittsburgh last year. Angelo picked up on the second ring. Stevens? What? I need you. Now. Sending you an address. Bring whatever you've got. Copy that. The second call was to his lawyer, a sharp woman named Michelle Gould who'd handled the custody case. Mr. Stevens, it's 4 in the morning. I need you to file emergency protective orders. Harold Spaulding and 8 associates. I'll text you the details. On what grounds? Assault of a minor. My son. It happened yesterday. A pause. Did you call the police? No. Mr. Stevens. Just file the papers. Please. The third call was to Harold's cell. This time, someone answered. Not Harold. A younger voice, cocky. Yeah. Put my son on the phone. Who's this? Scott Stevens. Max's father. Put him on. Laughter. Your kid's sleeping, man. Had a rough day. Might want to teach him some manners when he wakes up. Is he hurt? Define hurt. He's breathing, if that's what you mean. Got a few bruises. Couple cracked ribs, maybe. Nothing permanent. Harold said to make it memorable, not fatal. Scott's hand tightened on the phone. What's your name? Why? You gonna come find me? More laughter. You're halfway around the world, soldier boy. By the time you get back, this'll all be settled. Harold's already got the police report filed. Says your kid tried to rob him. We had to defend ourselves. You know how it goes. I know exactly how it goes, Scott said quietly. I'll be seeing you soon. Sure you will, tough. Scott hung up. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He'd been trained for impossible situations. This was just another mission. Extract the asset. Neutralize the threat. Complete the objective. Angelo was waiting in the arrivals area, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He took one look at Scott's face and nodded. Where we going? My house first. Then Harold Spaulding's. The construction guy? Stevens, that dude is connected. You start something with him. He started something with my son. I'm going to finish it. Angelo studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. All right, your call. But for the record, this is probably the stupidest thing either of us has ever done. Note it. They drove through empty Pittsburgh streets in Angelo's pickup, the city still asleep. Scott's house was dark when they pulled up. The front door was hanging open. Scott was out of the truck before it fully stopped, weapon drawn. Angelo followed, covering the angles. The living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, pictures smashed. Blood on the carpet. Not much, but enough. Scott's jaw tightened. He moved through the house, clearing rooms automatically, until he reached Max's bedroom. His son was on the bed, curled up, asleep or unconscious. His face was swollen, one eye blackened. His shirt was torn, revealing bruises across his ribs. Max! Scott's voice cracked. He holstered his weapon and crossed to the bed. Max, it's Dad. Max is good, I opened. For a second there was fear, then recognition, then tears. Dad, I'm here. I'm here now. You're safe. They said you couldn't. Grandpa said. I know what he said. He was wrong. Scott gently checked the injuries. Definitely cracked ribs. Bruised face. Possibly a concussion. But alive? Alive was enough to work with. Can you tell me what happened? Max's story came out in fits and starts. Harold had shown up yesterday afternoon with 8 men. Said it was time Max learned about family loyalty. When Max refused to go with them, they'd forced their way in. Held him down. Harold had watched while his men took turns. Nothing sexual, just violence. Fists and boots. A lesson, Harold kept saying. A lesson about respecting your elders. They took pictures, Max whispered. Said they'd post them online if you tried anything. Said everyone would see what happens to military brats who don't know their place. Scott felt something cold settle in his chest. Not rage. Rage was hot, uncontrolled. This was different. This was calculation. Did they say where they were going? Harold's got a warehouse on the north side. The old steel mill property. They said they'd be there, waiting to see what you'd do. Angelo appeared in the doorway. We need to get him to a hospital. No hospitals. Max grabbed Scott's arm. They said if we go to the police or a hospital, they'll know. They'll come back. Grandpa said next time it'll be worse. Scott looked at Angelo. You still know that combat medic? The one who retired to Oakland. Yeah, Kenny Suarez. He runs a free clinic. Keeps his mouth shut. Call him. Tell him we're coming. Tell him it's cash, and he didn't see anything. Scott, I can't risk them knowing I'm back yet. Not until I'm ready. Angelo pulled out his phone. This is going to hell. You know that. It was already in hell. I'm just evening the odds. An hour later, Max was patched up at Kenny's clinic, dosed with painkillers and resting. Kenny had confirmed. 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising, mild concussion. Nothing life-threatening, but Max would hurt for weeks. Scott sat beside his son's cot, holding his hand. Max was asleep now, his breathing even. He looked so young. 14 years old, and he'd already learned what it meant to have enemies. What's the play? Angelo asked quietly. Scott didn't look away from Max. Harold wants to send a message. Show me he can hurt what I love. Prove he's untouchable. And I'm going to show him what happens when you go after a SEAL's family. He finally looked at Angelo. I need you to do something for me. Name it. Take Max, drive him to your sister's place in Cleveland. Stay there until I call. What are you going to do? What I'm trained to do. Complete the mission. Angelo hesitated. Scott, these guys, they're not Taliban. They're American citizens. You start disappearing people, you'll end up in Leavenworth. Then I'll end up in Leavenworth. But my son will be safe. He stood, his decision made. I've got 11 hours before sunset. That's when Harold's expecting me to show up, probably with cops. He thinks I'll play by the rules. Won't you? Scott smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. The rules went out the window when he put his hands on my son. He spent the next 4 hours doing reconnaissance. Harold's warehouse was exactly where Max said it would be. A converted steel mill on the North Shore, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. Scott circled it 3 times, noting entry points, sight lines, the position of guards. There were 2 men outside, casual but alert. Ex-cons, probably. Harold's usual type. Inside, thermal imaging through his scope showed 8 heat signatures clustered in the main floor of the building. Harold and his crew, right where they said they'd be. Waiting. They thought they held all the cards. They had the local police on their payroll, the photos of Max as leverage, the numbers advantage. They thought Scott was just a soldier bound by laws and regulations and the Geneva Convention. They'd never dealt with someone who'd already died once before. That's what they didn't understand. Scott had died 2 years ago, the moment Alicia took her last breath. He'd been going through the motions since then, existing but not living, doing his job because it was all he had left. Max was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that kept him tethered to this world. And Harold had hurt him. Scott returned to his truck and pulled out his sat phone. One more call to make. To Lieutenant Commander Jackson. Sir, it's Stevens. Scott. Status. I found my son. He's safe. Injuries are non-life-threatening. Thank God. Have you contacted local authorities? That's complicated, sir. A long pause. Scott, what are you planning? Nothing that concerns the Navy, sir. As of right now, I'm requesting emergency leave. Family medical situation. Approved. But Scott, sir, with respect, I need to handle this my way. Another pause. Then, quietly, I never heard from you. Understood. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Jackson hesitated one more time. For what it's worth, give him hell. Scott smiled grimly. That's the plan. The sun was setting when Scott pulled up to the warehouse. He walked into the front door, unarmed, hands visible. The two guards outside had tried to stop him, but he'd simply said, "Tell Harold his son-in-law is here." They'd escorted him inside, where Harold waited with his 7 remaining men. The 8th, Scott had learned, was named Marvin Witt, the one who'd answer the phone. He stood at Harold's right, still cocky, still smiling. Harold Spaulding was 63 years old, built like a concrete block, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He looked at Scott the way a man might look at a particularly stubborn stain. "You made good time," Harold said. "Didn't think you'd be back for days. Disappointed? Curious. Thought the military would keep you busy with red tape and procedures. Guess you've got some pull. When it matters." Scott looked around the warehouse. Industrial space, high ceilings, no windows. Private. You wanted my attention. You got it. Harold smiled. This isn't about attention, Scott. This is about respect. About understanding your place in the world. You took my daughter from me. Turned her against her family. Then you had the balls to fight me for custody of my grandson. Max is my son. He's a Spaulding. My blood. And I'll be damned if he grows up to be some self-righteous jarhead who thinks he's better than everyone else. Harold stepped closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign custody papers. Max comes to live with me. You get supervised visitation twice a year. Maybe. And if I refuse, then we have another conversation with Max. A longer one. And this time, we'll make sure the damage is permanent. The 8 men around Harold shifted, ready. They were rough types, ex-cons, street fighters, the kind of men who enjoyed violence. They thought they were tough. Scott had fought in Fallujah, had extracted hostages from Somali pirates, had killed men in close-quarters combat in circumstances these thugs couldn't imagine. "I have a better idea," Scott said quietly. "How about you and your boys here answer for what you did to a 14-year-old kid?" Harold laughed. "You're outnumbered, Scott. And even if you somehow got lucky, I own half the cops in this city. You'd be in jail before you made it out of the parking lot. I'm not planning to go to jail." "Then what are you planning?" Scott smiled. It was the smile he used before a mission. The one that said the targeting was complete, the plan was set, and now it was just execution. "I'm planning to give Max a choice," he said, "about who dies first." The temperature in the room dropped. Harold's smile faded. "What? You heard me. See, you made a mistake, Harold. You thought this was about intimidation. About showing me you're in control." Scott's voice was calm, almost conversational. "But what you actually did was declare war on someone who's been at war his entire adult life. Someone who knows how to find people, how to hurt people, how to make people disappear." Marvin Witt laughed nervously. "Big talk from—" He never finished the sentence. Scott moved faster than anyone expected, and suddenly Marvin was on the ground, his arm bent at an angle arms weren't meant to bend. He screamed. The other 7 men rushed forward, but Scott was already moving, using Marvin as a shield, breaking free, striking. It was beautiful, in its way, 15 years of SEAL training against men who thought they were tough. It took 30 seconds. When it was over, 3 men were unconscious, 2 were nursing broken bones, and the remaining 2 were backing away, reconsidering their life choices. Harold hadn't moved. He watched, calculating. Scott stood in the center of the carnage, barely breathing hard. "Here's what's actually going to happen, Harold. I'm going to leave here. You're going to sit tight and think about your choices. Tomorrow, at noon, you and these 8 men are going to be back here. And Max is going to be with me. And he's going to point at one of you. Just one. And that person is going to face the consequences of what you did to him." "You're insane," Harold breathed. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a father who's done playing by rules that don't apply to people like you." Scott headed for the door, stepping over groaning bodies. "Noon tomorrow, Harold. Don't make me come find you." Outside, The evening air was cool. Scott's hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash. But his mind was clear. Phase 1 complete. Now came the hard part, making them understand what they'd unleashed. Max was awake when Scott returned to Angelo's sister's house in Cleveland. He sat up as Scott entered, wincing at the movement. "Dad!" "Hey, buddy." Scott sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Sore. The ribs hurt." Max paused. Did you find them?" "I did." "And?" Scott took a breath. This was the conversation he'd been dreading and planning for in equal measure. "Max, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." "Okay. What they did to you is wrong. Criminal. They should face justice for it. But the system..." Scott chose his words carefully. "The system doesn't always work the way it should. Your grandfather has a lot of influence. A lot of friends in the police department. If we go through official channels, there's a real chance nothing happens to them. Or worse, they spin it somehow, so it looks like you were at fault." Max's good eye widened. "But I didn't." I know you didn't. But that's how men like Harold operate. They rewrite reality to suit their needs." Scott leaned forward. "So, I'm giving you a choice. We can do this the legal way. File charges, get lawyers involved, trust the system to work. Or what? Or we handle it ourselves. The way I was trained to handle threats. The way that ensures they can never hurt you again." Max was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was smaller. "What did you do in Afghanistan, Dad?" "Like, really do?" Scott had never fully explained his job. Max knew he was a SEAL, knew it meant special operations, but they'd never discussed the details. "I found bad people, and I stopped them from hurting others." "How did you stop them?" "However I needed to." Another silence. Then, "Grandpa said you were a murderer. When they were hitting me. He said you killed people for money, and that's why Mom was ashamed of you." Scott felt his chest tighten. "Your mother was never ashamed of me, Max. And I never killed anyone for money. I did my duty, followed orders, protected my country and the people I love. There's a difference. But you did kill people." "Yes." "Would you kill Grandpa?" The question hung in the air. Scott met his son's eyes, the one that wasn't swollen shut, and saw not fear, but something else. Curiosity, maybe even hope. If it meant keeping you safe, if it was the only way. Scott nodded slowly. "Yes, I would." Max absorbed this. "I don't want you to go to jail." "I won't. I promise." "How can you promise that?" "Because I'm very good at what I do, Max. And because your grandfather doesn't know who he's dealing with." Scott reached out, gently squeezed his son's hand. "But I need to know you're okay with this. With me handling it my way. Because once I start, I can't stop. And you need to understand what that means." "What does it mean?" "It means those 8 men who hurt you will face consequences. Real ones. Permanent ones. It means your grandfather will learn he can't touch you ever again. And it means..." Scott paused. "It means you'll see a side of me you've never seen before. A side I've tried to keep separate from our life together. I need you to be ready for that." Max thought for a long time. Outside, they could hear Angelo and his sister talking quietly in the kitchen. A normal evening in a normal house. But nothing about this was normal anymore. Finally, Max spoke. "They broke my ribs, Dad. Said I deserved it for having a piece of shit father. Said Mom was glad she died, so she didn't have to see what I'd become." His voice cracked. "They laughed when I cried. Grandpa just watched. He didn't even stop them when I begged. He just smiled." Scott's jaw tightened. "So yeah," Max said quietly. "I'm okay with you handling it your way. I want them to hurt like they hurt me. I want Grandpa to know he was wrong." "Okay." Scott stood. "Then here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, noon, we're going back to Pittsburgh, to Harold's warehouse. And you're going to do something hard. Something you'll remember for the rest of your life. But when it's over, this will be finished. They'll never bother us again. What do I have to do?" Scott told him. Max's good eye went wide. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay, I can do that." "You sure? I'm your son, right? You said I'm brave like Mom." Scott felt tears prick his eyes. Alicia had been the bravest person he'd ever known. Faced cancer without flinching, worried more about Max and Scott than herself right up until the end. "Yeah," he whispered. "You're brave like Mom." They drove back to Pittsburgh the next morning. Angelo came with them, along with Kenneth Suarez, the medic who'd patched Max up. Kenny had hesitated when Scott explained what he needed, but one look at Max's bruised face had changed his mind. "This is wrong," Kenny said as they drove. "On like 17 different levels." "I know," Scott said. "We could all go to prison." "I know, and you're still doing it." "Yes." Kenny sighed. "All right then. For the record, I think you're insane. But I'm in." They arrived at the warehouse at 11:45. The same two guards were outside, looking nervous. When they saw Scott's truck, one of them pulled out a phone. Scott parked directly in front of the entrance. He helped Max out of the truck. His son moved carefully, each breath bringing a wince of pain. Angelo and Kenny flanked them as they walked to the door. Inside, Harold waited with his 8 men. They looked worse than yesterday. 3 were sporting bandages. One had his arm in a sling. Marvin Witt's face was purple with bruises. But they were all there. All 9 of them. Harold's eyes found Max, and something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, but close. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "You actually came." "Said I would." Scott kept Max slightly behind him. "Everyone accounted for. All here, like you demanded." Harold crossed his arms. "Now, what? You gonna try that combat bullshit again? Because I got reinforcements on speed dial. 1 call and—" "No calls," Scott interrupted. He nodded to Angelo, who pulled out a signal jammer and activated it. "And no reinforcements. This is between us now." Harold's expression tightened. "Scott, think about what you're doing. You attack us, it's 9 against 3. You'll lose. And then what happens to Max? I'm not here to attack anyone." Scott guided Max forward into the center of the room. His son stood straight despite the pain, meeting Harold's eyes. "I'm here to give Max what you try to take from him." "And what's that?" "Justice." Scott looked at his son. "Max, these are the men who hurt you. Your grandfather and his 8 friends. You know what we talked about last night?" Max nodded, his voice steady despite his fear. "Yes, sir." "Then go ahead. Pick one." The warehouse went deadly silent. Harold's face drained of color. "What?" "Max is going to choose one of you," Scott said calmly. "Just one. And that person is going to face the exact same treatment you gave him. Blow for blow. Hit for hit. Until he's suffered exactly what my 14-year-old son suffered." "You're out of your goddamn mind," Marvin Witt snarled. "We're not going to just stand here and—" "Yes, you are." Scott's voice cut like a knife. "Because if you don't, I will hunt down every single one of you. Not today. Not tomorrow. But I will find you. And what I do to you will make yesterday look like a playground scuffle." He let that sink in. "But if you cooperate, if one of you steps up and takes responsibility, the rest of you walk away. Today. Forever. That's the deal." "This is insane," Harold said, but his voice shook slightly. "You started this," Scott said simply. "You wanted to teach Max a lesson about power. About who's in control. Fine. Consider this your continuing education." He looked at Max. "Go ahead, son. Pick one." Max walked slowly past the line of men. They shifted uncomfortably, some trying to meet his eyes, others looking away. When he reached Marvin Witt, he stopped. "This one," Max said. He was the one who laughed the most. "Who said the worst things about Mom?" Marvin backed up a step. "Kid, listen. He's the one I choose," Max said firmly. Scott nodded. He turned to Marvin. "You have a choice. You can take what's coming, or you can run, and I'll find you within 48 hours. "What it going to be?" Marvin looked at Harold, desperate. "Boss, you can't let him." "Shut up," Harold said quietly. He was staring at Scott with something like understanding. "This isn't about what I'll let happen. This is about what will happen regardless." He met Scott's eyes. "How do I know you'll keep your word? That you'll leave the rest of us alone?" "You don't. But consider the alternative. I'm offering you a way out that doesn't involve all 8 of you disappearing. One man takes the fall. The rest of you learn a valuable lesson about picking your targets. That's a better deal than you deserve." The math was simple, and Harold knew it. One man's suffering versus 8. It wasn't even a question. "Marvin," Harold said. "Take it, boss. Take it, or you're fired. And on your own with him." Harold jerked his chin at Scott. Marvin's face went through several emotions. Disbelief, anger, fear, resignation. Finally, he nodded. "All right, fine. Let's get this over with." Kenny Suarez stepped forward, medical bag in hand. "For the record, I'm documenting this under duress." "Noted," Scott said. He looked at Max. You don't have to watch this if you don't want to. Max shook his head. I want to watch. So he did. Kenny measured out precisely. 3 cracked ribs, multiple contusions, facial bruising. Scott administered each blow with clinical precision, enough force to match the injury, not enough to cause permanent damage. Marvin screamed, begged, cursed, but the other 7 men didn't move, didn't intervene, because they understood now. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance, about scales being evened. When it was over, Marvin lay on the floor, gasping, his breathing shallow. Kenny checked him over. 3 cracked ribs, bruising, mild concussion. He'll live, but he'll hurt for weeks. Just like Max, Scott said quietly. He turned to Harold. We're done here. You and your boys walk away. You never contact Max again. You never speak his name. You don't show up at his school, his games, anywhere he might be. As far as you're concerned, he doesn't exist. And if I refuse, then we do this again. And next time, it won't be one man. It'll be all of you. Starting with you. Scott stepped closer. Do you really want to test me, Harold? Do you really want to see how far I'll go to protect my son? Harold looked at Max, who stared back with one good eye and one swollen shut. The boy didn't look away. Didn't flinch. No, Harold said finally. We're done. Good. Scott helped Max toward the door. Angelo and Kenny followed. At the threshold, Scott paused. One more thing, Harold. What? Alicia wasn't ashamed of me. She was ashamed of you. That's why she left. That's why she never wanted Max to know you. Because she knew exactly what kind of man you were. And she was right. They left Harold standing among his broken men, the warehouse silent except for Marvin's labored breathing. Outside, Max took a shaky breath. Is it really over? Yes, Scott said. It's really over. What if he comes after us anyway? Scott smiled. He won't. Harold's a bully and a thug, but he's not stupid. He knows now that I'm willing to go further than he is. That's all that matters in his world. They drove back to Cleveland in silence. Max fell asleep in the back seat, pain medication finally kicking in. Angelo drove, while Kenny monitored Max's vitals from the passenger seat. Scott stared out the window, watching Pittsburgh fade in the rearview mirror. He felt empty. Not satisfied, not victorious. Just empty. You good? Angelo asked quietly. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Scott thought about it. About what he'd done. About the line he'd crossed. Alicia would have been horrified, he said finally. Maybe. Or maybe she would have understood. You protected your son. By becoming the thing she was afraid I'd become. Angelo glanced at him. You're not a monster, Scott. Monsters don't lose sleep over doing what needs to be done. They enjoy it. And if I did enjoy it, watching Marvin suffer, did you? Scott considered lying. Then shook his head. No, it just felt necessary. Then you're still one of the good guys. Barely. But still. They reached Angelo's sister's house after midnight. Max woke up long enough to get into bed, then crashed immediately. Scott sat beside him, watching his son sleep. In the dim light, Max looked younger than 14. Vulnerable. I'm sorry, Scott whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you had to see that today. I'm sorry for all of it. Max's good eye opened slightly. Dad, yeah. Thank you. For coming back. 4. He trailed off, too tired to finish. Get some sleep, buddy. We'll talk more in the morning. But Max was already asleep again, his breathing even. Scott stayed there until dawn, keeping watch. The way he should have been doing all along. 2 days later, Michelle Gould called. Mr. Stevens, I have some interesting news. What's that? Harold Spaulding just filed a withdrawal of all legal claims regarding Max. No custody suit, no visitation rights, nothing. He's dropped everything. I see. Care to tell me what changed his mind? We came to an understanding. What kind of understanding? The permanent kind. Michelle was quiet for a moment. Don't know details? No. All right then. Well, congratulations. Max is all yours, legally speaking. No more challenges. Thank you, Michelle. After he hung up, Scott allowed himself a small smile. It was over. Really over. Max healed over the next few weeks. The ribs knitted, the bruises faded. He went back to school, back to baseball, back to his normal life. He didn't talk about what happened in the warehouse, and Scott didn't push. But something had changed between them. Max looked at his father, differently now. Not with fear exactly, more like understanding. He'd seen what Scott was capable of, seen the warrior underneath the dad persona, and he'd made his choice, to stand beside that warrior, to let him act, to be part of that world. One evening, a month after the incident, Max found Scott in the garage working on the truck. "Dad, yeah, I've been thinking about joining the military. After high school, I mean." Scott's hands stilled on the wrench. "That's a big decision. I know, but I want to be like you. Want to be able to protect people who can't protect themselves." "Max, I'm not saying I want to do what you did in the warehouse. I'm saying I want to be strong enough that bullies can't hurt me, can't hurt anyone I care about." Max met his eyes. "You show me that strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being willing to do what's right, even when it's hard." Scott felt his throat tighten. "Your mother wanted you to have a normal life, a safe life. Mom's gone, Dad. And my life stopped being normal the day Grandpa showed up." Max crossed his arms. "I'm not saying I need to be a SEAL, but I want to serve, want to matter. Is that okay?" Scott pulled his son into a hug, careful of the still tender ribs. "Yeah, Max, that's okay. That's more than okay." They stood like that for a long time, father and son, warriors in their own ways. The paperwork came through 3 weeks later. Scott's emergency leave was approved, extended to 60 days to handle family medical issues. Lieutenant Commander Jackson called personally. "How's your son?" "Better. Healing. Good. And the situation?" "Resolved. I'm not going to ask how. Probably for the best, sir." Jackson chuckled. "You know, I've known you for 8 years, Stevens. You've always been one of my best operators. Precise, controlled, professional. But I've also always known there was something underneath. Something harder, colder. Sir, I'm glad it's pointed in the right direction. That's all." The call ended. Scott sat in his kitchen, staring at his phone. He thought about Harold, wondered if the old man was sitting somewhere thinking about him too. Probably not. Men like Harold didn't waste time on might-have-beens. But Scott knew the truth. Harold would never forget, would never forgive, would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if today was the day Scott Stevens decided the truce was over. Good. Let him wonder. Let him feel a fraction of the fear Max had felt. Max came home from school that afternoon with a letter. College recruiter came by, said if I keep my grades up and stay in baseball, I could get a scholarship. That's great. Yeah. Max hesitated. "I was thinking maybe I should apply to the Naval Academy instead of enlisting right out of high school." Scott looked at his son, taller now, stronger, carrying himself with new confidence. "Your mom would have loved that. You think? I know. She always wanted you to get a good education. Cert if you wanted, but on your terms. Not because you had to." Max grinned. "Then I'll apply. Worst they can say is no." That night, after Max went to bed, Scott pulled out an old photo album. Alicia smiled at him from a dozen pictures, at their wedding, holding newborn Max, laughing at some forgotten joke. He touched her face gently. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "He's safe. He's strong. He's going to be okay." In his mind, he could almost hear her response. "I knew you would. You're a SEAL, remember? You never leave anyone behind." "I love you," he said to the photo, to her memory, to everything she'd been and still was to him. Then he closed the album and went to check on Max one last time before bed. His son slept peacefully, no nightmares, no fear. Mission accomplished. The weeks turned to months. Harold kept his word. No contact, no attempts at custody, no mysterious visitors. Marvin Witt recovered but walked with a limp now, a permanent reminder. The other 7 men scattered, moved on with their lives. Some left Pittsburgh entirely. They'd learned their lesson. Scott returned to active duty after 60 days. Max stayed with Angelo's sister during deployments, visited his father during leave. They fell into a rhythm. Not perfect, but workable. On Max's 15th birthday, Scott gave him a gift. A photo of Alicia, professionally framed. On the back, Scott had written, "You have her courage, her kindness, and her strength. Never forget who you are." Max cried when he read it. Then he hugged his father and said, "Thank you. For everything. For saving me." "You don't need to thank me, Max. That's what fathers do. They protect their kids. No matter what. Even if it costs them everything." especially then. Later that night, Scott got a message from an unknown number. You won this round. But the game's not over. He recognized the writing style. Harold. Scott deleted the message without responding. Let the old man posture. Let him threaten. It didn't matter, because Scott Stevens had learned something important in that warehouse. He would go to any length, cross any line, break any rule to keep Max safe. And Harold knew it now, too. That made all the difference. 3 years later, Max received his acceptance letter to the Naval Academy. He'd be leaving for Annapolis in the fall. Scott took him out to celebrate, just the two of them at Alicia's favorite restaurant. Nervous? Scott asked. Terrified, Max admitted, then grinned. But in a good way. I'm ready. I know you are. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? What you did to Marvin? To Grandpa? Scott considered the question carefully. No. I regret that it had to happen. I regret you had to see it. But I don't regret protecting you. Would you do it again? If you had to. In a heartbeat. Max nodded slowly. Good. Because I'd do the same. If someone hurt you, I'd find them. And I'd make them pay. Scott felt pride and sorrow in equal measure. Let's hope it never comes to that. But if it does, we handle it together. As a family. They finished their meal, talking about Annapolis, about what came next, about the future. But in the back of Scott's mind, he was always calculating, always planning. Because Harold's message had been clear. This wasn't over. Maybe it never would be, but that was okay. Scott had spent 15 years as a SEAL. He knew how to fight wars that never ended. Knew how to watch his six, protect his assets, complete his mission. And his mission was simple. Keep Max safe. Today, tomorrow, forever. Whatever it took. Harold Spaulding stood at his office window, looking out over Pittsburgh's skyline. 3 years since that day in the warehouse. 3 years of watching his back, sleeping light, jumping at shadows. Marvin Witt was a shell of his former self. Still limped. Still flinched when someone raised their voice. The others had scattered like roaches when the lights came on. And Harold was alone. He'd built an empire on fear and intimidation. Now he was the one afraid. The one intimidated. Because somewhere out there, Scott Stevens was waiting. Watching. Ready to act if Harold stepped out of line even once. It was a special kind of hell. Harold picked up his phone, pulled up that old contact he swore he'd never use. A man who specialized in making problems disappear. A man who didn't ask questions. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then he set the phone down. No, Alicia had been right about Scott. The man was relentless. Start something now, and it wouldn't end until one of them was dead. And Harold wasn't sure he'd win that fight. He poured himself a drink instead, watching the sun set over the city he'd once owned. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Some enemies were better left alone. Scott Stevens was both. Across town, in a small house near the river, Scott sat on his porch watching Max pack for Annapolis. Through the window, he could see his son carefully folding his clothes, organizing his life into neat boxes. Alicia would have been so proud. Scott's phone buzzed. A message from Angelo. Saw Harold at the Steelers game. Looked old. Scared. You win, brother. Scott deleted the message. He hadn't won. Winning implied a game with rules, with an endpoint. This was just survival. His and Max's. And as long as they were both safe, as long as they were both standing, that was enough. He took a sip of coffee, watching the sunset, and allowed himself a moment of peace. Tomorrow, Max would start his journey. Tomorrow, Scott would return to his unit. Tomorrow, the world would keep turning. But tonight, they were together. They were safe. And sometimes that was all that mattered. The mission was complete. For now.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.